Again, this is the part 3 of chapter 11. Now that we have described the aggregate demand and aggregate supply, so we notice that the responsiveness of the demand side, the aggregate expenditure side, is quite different from the supply side or aggregate supply side of the economy. Aggregate supply, we notice that it's positively sloped and it's got like a inverted L shape kind, because there is a maximum capacity of the economy, so it becomes vertical at certain stage. And the aggregate demand is we at least give some reasons that it is downward sloping. We're going to talk about other reasons which approves that it's going to be downward sloping, but the overall thing is that we will have a certain level of price and certain level of output, which brings the entire economy into equilibrium. So both goods market and money market would be in the equilibrium. So if both goods and services market are in equilibrium, we will have aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is showing a combination of the price level and output, which both money market and goods market. So if we have a point here, neither money market or goods market are in equilibrium. If we have a point here, a price is too low, output is too low, it means that we don't have equilibrium in the economy. Supply side of the economy is deciding like this. Okay, aggregate supply. So producers and the consumers, collective consumers, will reach an equilibrium if we are having this much price and this much output. What is being produced by the firms is gonna be entirely purchased, and the money market is also, interest rate is in equilibrium. So that aggregate demand is representing the equilibrium level of both money and goods market at the same time. So is this equilibrium the ideal one? So we are here only picking up, we had three major markets. Number one, the output markets or goods and services market. So if we are in point E here, this market is in equilibrium. Number two, the money market, chapter 10. Is it in equilibrium? Yes, it is in equilibrium. The interest rate is for this level of output is represented as the money market and demand, money demand and money supply are intersecting. And 3, I put it in red, 3, we don't know whether the labor market is in equilibrium or not. If this is eventually in equilibrium, let's say this is exactly where the unemployment rate is equal natural rate of unemployment, then we would say that this is a very ideal. The third market is also in equilibrium, so we have tick, 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 and economy is in a good shape. But does it guarantee that if these two are happening, this is also going to happen? Not necessarily. Maybe the demand is here. Aggregate demand is here. And we assume that this is labor market is in equilibrium. So if we are in Y1, then we are in recession. Or maybe we are having a very sharp increase in the demand. Then we might have actually Y2, we have expansionary gap. So this is a recessionary gap, and this is a so depending on what would be the situation in the labor market, we would say that the equilibrium in the market is suitable or not suitable. So E prime, E double prime. So this is actually brought our ultimate target. We are able to explain all the three major concerns in macroeconomy and say that what may have caused that the unemployment rate is become an issue, how the inflation will affect the aggregate output and vice versa, and is it basically moving us away from the ideal state of economy. The ideal state of economy is that all inputs market and output markets are in equilibrium. So we are expecting to have all the three markets to be in equilibrium. So aggregate demand, aggregate supply guarantees two of them are happening. The model for aggregate demand, aggregate supply, the intersection, guarantees that two of them is, but the third one depends on whether or not labor market is in equilibrium also. And we are simplifying this with saying that if we are producing, if the economy is producing what is called full employment level of output, we would say that the money market is in equilibrium. So this one we are defining as the long run aggregate supply, which I'm going to explain, but I think there is one slide left before we explain the long run aggregate supply. And it is what are the other reasons for downward sloping of aggregate demand. So let me explain this, and then I will go to explain the long run aggregate supply. So with aggregate demand curve, the question is that why it is downward slope. Already we explained one reason, but there are three major reasons actually. Let's start it with the price level goes up. Once the price level goes up, these things are happening. We explained only the main one, but there are another reason. Number one is called that when the price level goes up, the purchasing power is dropping. Purchasing power, money buys less, right? So this is affecting our wealth. So this is called the wealth effect. Or consumption effect. It's causing that the consumption will go down. if your money, the salary you obtain can buy less, so whether you want or not, you're losing your purchasing power, so your consumption drops. So this was one of the components of aggregate expenditure, right? Aggregate expenditure was equal C plus I. We explained the second one in the above analysis. The money demand is shifting upward. People, because of their higher prices, the entire money demand is shifting, and then interest rate will go up. So this is called the interest effect or investment effect. And that is causing that investment will drop. Firms, those who wants to buy durable goods for the sake of production, they buy less of it because its cost of borrowing is increasing, so this is dropping. The third reason is the foreign market. Imagine that inflation in Oman is increased, but inflation in UAE is not changed. So it is worth that Omani people buy from UAE, and it is not worth UAE people buy from Oman, because relatively speaking, everything in UAE is becoming cheaper than Oman. So this is the domestic price level, and let's assume that the foreign inflation, the inflation in our neighboring countries or at international level is not changed. So the export of the economy will drop because foreigners are not going to buy from us, so the inflow of the money is not taking place, and our import from them is increasing. So what is going to happen in the X minus M? X is dropped and the negative side is increased. So overall this is dropping. So this is called the export effect or net export effect. Net export effect. And this is the net export is dropping. So altogether, the aggregate expenditure will drop, and then the new equilibrium is going to be lower. So we explained above the mainstream here, but there are other reasons. The consumption or wealth effect, which the textbook is explaining, and this is not has been explained in this textbooks, but I give you as a freebie that this is also true. So there are three reasons that the components of the aggregate expenditure as a result of inflation will drop. And the G we don't discuss it because we assumed it is discretionary. Discretionary. If it's endogenous, if the G may also be dropping, but no, most textbooks are considering as entirely exogenous. Okay, so three major components: consumption is dropping, investment is dropping, and net export is dropping. So it is the reason why it is downward sloping. The reason for being downward sloping is not because of the law of supply, law of demand. Remember that in microeconomics we will say that price, quantity, demanded. So if the price goes up, the quantity demanded drops, and we call it the law of demand. But in aggregate supply, aggregate demand, the aggregate demand is not the quantity of a specific commodity. It is all goods and services. And the price index is not the price of individual, it's the price index of all goods and services. So the reason for aggregate demand being downward sloping is not because of the law of demand, if you see it in the multiple choice, that why aggregate demand is downward sloping, because of three reasons. If the goods and services market wants to be in equilibrium, the moment the price increase, the aggregate expenditure shifts downward, so we are going to have a new equilibrium, a lower level of output. So that is why. So there's a nexus between the price and output, which is downward sloping. If this goes up, this goes down. If this goes down, this will move this way. So that is the reasons which I think we should have said it earlier, but that's the way that the book has been structured, so I followed the structure of the book. Finally, now let's talk about the goods market. So basically the aggregate supply, aggregate demand, it's an interesting concept. We must be on aggregate demand. We must be on aggregate demand. But the firms are thinking their own profit in the short run, and they will decide on their short run aggregate supply. So if we are here, economy is in equilibrium. Now we want to say, the moment the aggregate supply and aggregate demand are intersected, then economy is in equilibrium. If they're producing here, we have neither equilibrium in money market nor equilibrium in goods market, and firms are underproducing, so they can quickly hire more labor and come here. If they are here, they are oversupplying, so they will move downward to make the equilibrium. So if they are undersupply or oversupply, they're going to be coming to this point to equilibrium. So the short run level of output is going to be like this. So with a slightly increase in the price level, they can actually come to this level. But is it going to be the ideal position? So I said that the maximum level of output is this. So the book is showing with this. So this is when we are hiring entire labor force. So if I can show you the unemployment rate, the third factor, like this, here we have 0% unemployment rate. Okay, and here we have 100% unemployment rate. This is unemployment rate. And unemployment rate comprise of frictional, structural, and cyclical. We already said that this is if the economy is producing at the level which U is equal, this we call it U star. U is equal to U star. The economy would be Y equal Y star, or full employment level of output. Let's say that is that. Okay, so this is U is equal U star. Whereas here, the U is smaller than U star if it is in this side. And over here, U is bigger than U star. So it means that U cyclical unemployment is positive. Here it means that the cyclical unemployment is negative. So here the cyclical unemployment is 0. So if we go this way or this way, the ideal position would be to have here. So let's see what the book is saying. Imagine that the aggregate demand is, for some reasons, aggregate demand shifting to the right. Okay, shifting to the right. So aggregate demand for some reasons is shifting to the right. Aggregate demand. The new equilibrium is going to be Y1. Okay, and the price level is increasing to P1. But guess what's happening? That we are going to have very little unemployment rate. And because the price level has increased, so this is the firms Y and P, and this is the L and wage, and the other variables, input variables, but we said that the labor market and the output market, we want to find the relationship between them. If the price level goes up, so we are moving from point A to point B. Okay, so this has happened, but wages remain the same. If the wages remains the same, the firms starts moving upward to here, and the money market and goods market is going to be in equilibrium. So that's how the firms are going to be responding to the aggregate demand shift upward. Then the Y is going to be increasing and the P is going to be increasing. But guess what? Laborers are receiving the salary and they go to the goods market to buy things, but their purchasing power is dropping. So they may actually go and complain and say that now that everything is more expensive, we want a higher wages. And this is very likely that they may request for a higher wage. But if the higher wage happens, then the aggregate supply is going to be shifted to the left as a result of the wage adjustment. So if increase of this is leading to an increase in the wages, the aggregate supply is going to shift to the left, and then we are moving from point B to point C. Okay, and usually if it is like 10% increase here, and 10% increase here, then we are exactly producing what we used to produce. So we would say that the line which shows after the settlement in the labor market is also taking place, long run aggregate supply. And this is where we might have actually a negative cyclical unemployment. So those who normally prefer to be unemployed as the frictional or structural, they will also get job, and that is causing the wages goes up. And as the wages goes up, this is shifting to the left, and our economy is not going to stay long in the point B. So in the long run, we are going to be in here. So aggregate demand has increased, but the output remains as it is. But we will have a new level of price level, and it's going to be staying stable there. So stability of the prices in both, it's when both of them are adjusted eco-proportionally. That is what has been explained in this diagram, and we would refer to the aggregate supply long run when the money market has money market and goods market are already in equilibrium, because it's the intersection of the aggregate demand, but labor market also is associating with potential level of output, and that is the definition of the potential level of output, the level of aggregate output that sustains long run without inflation. So inflation will be sustained. Inflation will be sustained wherever the inflation is sustained. So it's like remaining 0% or 1%, but it stays at that level. That is called the potential level of output, and it's a vertical curve. So we now have a very strong tool to explain the business cycles with the help of the aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve, which in the next chapter we are going to explain it. There is one thing in economics in practice which I didn't want to skip it. Actually, the basic Keynesian model is the aggregate supply is flat and then becomes vertical. So in goods and services market, we might actually go above the full employment or below the full employment, but when you bring the price and output according to the Keynesian model, we have a very flat and suddenly vertical output. So in the full employment, if the aggregate demand shifting to the right, only causing inflation, it's not going to let soon this Y3, because of the inflationary, in real term we are going to produce the YF level. So that's it's nice. So it's critical thinking is the why the distance between aggregate expenditure 3 and aggregate expenditure 2 called the inflationary gap. So he was saying that if economy is producing more than full employment, that is entirely inflationary. So it's the aggregate supply is going to be vertical. Yes, well, with this we come to the end, and these are the terminology to be reviewed. and the implication of this model is going to be explained in the next chapter. Thank you.